See, when you shut the nets, maybe say 9, 10 o'clock at night, you got a cup of tea and maybe when your turn to keep a watch. Somebody to be, it had to be somebody in watch. Now, because when your turn to keep watch, you was on the one travelling around about the boat in your own, around the wheels and said, something had a smoke, or, but all way around about you was water, water, water. Not as clear, sometimes not even seabirds. Well, your thoughts wandered. You just look at the sea, if it, no, if it far near, but all this water here. You look at up a beanie, a sky a beanie, a bonny blue sky. Now, would there be folk up here? Would there be humans up a bean his? Naturally, your thoughts turned all kind of wise. But it wasn't for danger. It was just wondering and curiosity. Because when you was brought up at the sea, you never thought in danger. Even when you was catching a storm, you didn't think in danger. You trusted your boat, you trusted your crew. And you can't, you're going to mock the land. And that was about it. You was quite happy. She didn't care anything else but to be happy, you see. It was your work, it was your job, it was your neighbours, it was your pals. And you just made the best of them.
Did you discuss, was this a sort of a thing that was discussed in the boats, what you have said?
Well, at times, no. We've been, say, away from home. And you've been sitting a weekend in a bunchy in the cabin, maybe bad weather, rain, never. In fact, you never had very much money to go ashore. If you got your paper on the weekend or your cigarettes or anything like that, you couldn't afford much there. Well, when you were sitting in a cabin, sometimes you'd have a game of crib. You'd have news to when your sails were crib. Naturally, religion come into your view as well. You see, you can't, when you're not company of the cut, you can't avoid that kind of things. It just, the news gradually work it around town. Somebody that maybe got in word for him, the minister's no wheel. Well, that's set you going, set them going, you see. They'd have spoken about religion that way. Now, there've been brethren that have been sitting with their Bibles open and their tracts before them, in discussing, looking for a different way, reading the script that was there, to get a different meaning out of what their neighbours did. It all ended in the same thing.
So did they keep Bibles aboard the boat as well?
Oh, aye, they all had their Bibles, oh aye.
They kept their Bible with them.
Oh, you wouldn't have been away from him without that. They were only more religion than everybody, but you just, it was something that belonged to you.
A way of life.
A way of life. And if you could help it in another, well, you advise in another, you help it in another, you share it with another.
Can you tell us something about your earlier life as a laddie, getting about the shore and that, and for yourself? Can you mind the old days?
Well, you know, all the days, you see, there's a race of all fishermen, Bertie. All way far over the gate, it didn't matter how far you was, there was a race of all fishermen. Now, as a school loon, you could do them on them, and you hear their stories, and they'd have been shifting their boats, more on their boats, making ready for going out. You help at them, you get out with them. Now, at next time, they'd have told you, now, go and get a pail of pullers, and we'll take you out for a sail the night. Out and see if you get a bit of fish to your father and mother. Well, you only loons a 9, 10-year-old, 11-year-old, you know, way over the beach and over the sands and into the water, looking for pullers for them. You come here with a pail of pullers. Now, down here about 5:30 or 6 o'clock, and you'll get out along bars. You get out and you took a box or 12 cordlings. you might only got a couple of cordlings home with you for your pail of pullers. Didn't matter, you weren't interested. But they took their cordlings home and dried them, and they had their winter meat. Dried fish, and stokes of dried fish, and stokes of salt herring, and then they got their tatties for the farms. And that was the winter's meat. You, as a young loon, you was doing that, you see. It was just a way of life. In every village, in all fishing villages did the same thing. That was just how you lived through your life. Then as he grew up, he got a more responsible job. He was able to go on out and be another crew. And then you joined the herring boats. Then you get about the Greatland. And that was just your life.
Sheep. Bum, down, orem, steady, tiptoe, wasty, nanny, dillans, lubin, bow, dan, wally, bully, books, teat, and doofy. Breeder, choppy, cookie, fout, mar, phobie, tully, stormy, mealy, and pips, and fivey. Downie, Downie, Dutch, Petrie, Coat, 4 brothers. Berkey, Co, Wolsey, Oceans, Shank, Doe, Gurky, Blinkers, Tush, and Tucky. Duthie, Troop, Chrome, 2, Scourgy, Sammy, Tommy, Stuarty, Shea, Dye, and Tondu. Buchan, Shochel, Screwy, Murdy, and Corner. Sam, Bogey, and Barley. Duncan, Palms, Lell, Teal, and Burkey. McLean, Ben. Bruce, Brish. Now what is a name for us is Scourgy, Sturk, Punch, Doubt, Goshens, Lonks, Tillens, Nosh, Nop, Lovey, and is all bricks. There's so many folk with the same name, you see. She ken the good boy name.
That's all the way you could do it, aye, use a boy name.
Ah, well. And you see the schoolmaster, Mr. Forbes, that was a poor Martin. There were so many with the same names. He gave them names. And there was 3 Annie Richies. Annie Balfour Ritchie, it was Annie B. Annie Taylor Ritchie was Annie T. And if you couldn't get a name for him, he gave them a name of their street. Annie 3. Next door. That's why June 2, good June 2. June the 1 and June the 2. Yeah. There we are.
fleet intact, to keep it as far as humanly possible to the numbers we've got now, because it is an all-important part of the northeast of Scotland, to the coastal villages. If we look at the pelagic fleet, a lot of it belongs to Gardenstown, Rosehearty, Inverallochie, Peterhead, Fraserburgh. Another large part belongs to the islands in Shetland, and we've got 3 Northern Irish vessels and 1 from the west coast of Scotland. So the fleet is very important to the coastal communities of Scotland. Where do we go from here? Well, we see the market expanding daily. In the space of the last 2 years, 2 years ago, one would never ever visualise that Japan would be taking the tonnages of fish it's now taking. I mean, in the space of the last year, Japan has taken from Norway and Scotland combined tonnages probably reaching up as high as 140,000 tonnes. The tonnages of fish coming ashore, if we look at it in comparison to 30 years ago. 30 years ago was looking at a massive catch as far as herring or mackerel was concerned, would have been 200 crans of fish. Now we're looking at vessels coming into Fraserburgh and Peterhead with catches in excess of 500 tonnes. Now 500 tonnes related back to crans comes out at 32,500 crans of fish, which was a massive day's fishing at any time in the history of herring fishing, when we had 300 and 400 and 500 vessels landing into Fraserburgh and Peterhead. 32,500 crans would have been considered a very big fishing then. Now it's achievable by 1 vessel. For a year and a half we launched this vessel, and for 3 years, 3 of us, it started a second phase of certainly my life at sea. I finished up as skipper again, but 2 of them who had previously been carpenters finished up as skippers as well. Again, we started off fishing locally, sprats in the Murray Firth, prawn trawling, etc., etc. And again events overtook us. The sprat fishery in the Murray Firth just totally finished. Again it was a move back into bigger vessels, this time pursuing sprat fishing on the west coast of Scotland and down in the northeast coast of England, with prawn trawling as the main backup to that during the rest of the season. That again dried up, and in the early, 1970, with the first new vessel built, she was 76 foot long, built mainly for herring fishing. That was followed in 1972 with another vessel for herring fishing, but with a twin adaptability, namely beer trawling and pursuing. That carried on during the early part of the 70s up to about 76. And again, with the advent of larger vessels appearing in the scene, we were forced to move into a different scene again. And that was when we bought from Sweden one of the first larger vessels to Scotland, 150 odd feet. That took us then into a different scenario altogether, opened up Europe for us for landing, opened up the channel fishing for mackerel in the winter seasons, with all the market possibilities down there. It opened up Holland, it opened up France, and that carried on until 1980, when for one reason or other, which at the time was very important but now was seen to be a stupid mistake on the part of the government, they lost 1 million tonnes of mackerel on paper, and we were forced to, our quotas were cut from 360 tonne a week to 90, which quite honestly just was not viable. The vessel was sold to South Africa, another vessel purchased, a smaller vessel more adaptable to the various different types of fisheries that was available at that time. And unfortunately I had a bad accident and finished up spending 2 years ashore. Since then, the pattern is more or less settled down now that we fish for mackerel for roughly 6 months a year, and we fish for herring 3 months a year. And the other 3 months a year, if we're not tied up to the quayside, we fish for sand eels and stuff like that. One of the outcomes of all this really has been that because of the fact we were pushed from pillar to post with very little input into decision making, I became involved in the latter part of the 70s in politics, or the politics of fisheries as we call it. I became chairman of the Pelagic Association in 1980, but it was very obvious after a very short period of time that for an active fishing skipper to be chairman of that particular association was physically impossible. To carry out 2 jobs successfully was something that just was not possible. So during the 80s I spent most of the time as being vice chairman, and we were very fortunate during that period as well that we had, first of all in Sandy Bayard, second with John West, probably 2 of the best chairmen that the association's ever had. Unfortunately again in 1989, through the untimely death of John West and the fact that my old accent was played up pretty badly again, I got the opportunity to become chairman of the Pelagic Association again in May 1989, and that's where I am at the present moment. And that then leads us into a different scenario altogether, where now, whilst we can't change the government decisions, we do have the power of a lot of input into decision making, rightly or wrongly, but we at least feel that we're part of a system now, something that's quite honestly we haven't felt for a very, very long time. One of the things we've got to bear in mind is the fact that whilst during the 60s, the 70s, there were massive stocks of fish, but the methods of catching were, in present day terms, crude to say the least. What we've got now is a fleet with an awesome catching capability. So as regards stock nowadays, the stock is probably just as healthy as it was 20 years ago. But due to climatic changes and various different changes there's been, the stock is further offshore and doesn't come to the shore so often as it used to do in the past. And we have to be very, very careful now that we don't overfish the stocks. And it is something that in the last 2 or 3 years is starting to become abundantly clear. We do have the support now of fishermen, we do have the support of scientists, we have the support of politicians. And okay, things are maybe not so easy at the moment. We've joined the EEC, but unfortunately Britain is an island. It's cut off from the rest of Europe. Its geographical position means that the market capabilities of the processing industry in Europe are limited insofar as that the cost of transport to the mainland of Europe is prohibitive.
When I was alone, like, it was herring, fishing, summertime, and autumn doing it at Yarmouth, or Longstaff of course. And then most of the Rosehearty boats, we wouldn't fuck them all. You know what, the Heelands usually over the winter for line fishing. them that didn't there had their baldies, it'd get the haddock lines, the small lines, talking haddock. I just stood there back here. Would have been about, I suppose, 6 or 8 of them at that time when I was at the school. And then a year before I left the school, there was 3 of the Rosehearty boats started to sea net. And when I left the school at 14, that was in September. In fact, I wasn't 14 till October, but I left the school in September and got out to sea net, and I was to sea net that winter. But as I say, the most of the boats would have been south at that time, you see. So I was that winter, and that was Saturday 1. We get for there, round the oven for a file in the spring. And there was nobody interested in white fish there at that time of the year, so there was lots of fish like, but we didn't get anything for them, so we had to pack up and come away home. And then for then on, it was just sea net with me all the time, but the sea net wasn't broke years before that. And later on, after a while, I was with this man that was in the originals that did with Benji Noble. It started to sea net in the broke. But I think that was, I'm not sure if it was 24 or 26 that he used to tell me to start it. But the lots of men had been at it for a year or 2 before that. But that was the start out in the broch, all Benji Noble and all Fifey boat, the Comfort. He was the originator in the broch. So I was at that, in the heron fishing, up until the war. And the only line fishing that I did was in the spring of the year. We used to get twathly all great line aboard, and when the skate was in the go, which was near skate to be got now, of course. They're 18. And that was the only line fishing really that I did.
Could you tell us the difference between the heron fishing and the sea net fishing?
Well, the sea net fishing is a entirely different proposition for the drift net. The drift net, you see, hung for the surface really, depending on the length of your buoy ropes. Maybe a couple of fathom below the surface, down to the depth of the net. But the sea net was a net, and at that time they were very small compared with what they use nowadays. And it was mostly prime fish that they get after. For example, when I started in the fall of the year, once September, we get a walk half across the firth, a walk off a bookie, and it was hake fishing. Now if you got a good hake, she was worth £1. If you got a good cod at the same time, she must have been worth £1. So it was prime fish to get after. And then during the months, say the end of December, January and February, all the fishing was doing just off here, off a Rosehearty, in the scar, for lemon soles and place. Because you got something for them at that time. You'd have gotten maybe £8 or £10 for a box of lemon soles. And a box of good line haddocks at that time would have been worth it. Oh, 12, 14, 16 bob maybe if they were dear. So it was the value of the fish really. Now after the war, of course, things kind of took off. And I was, first winter after the war, I was at the line fishing in the Highlands way, in the Byenames like. And in east winter they switched over to the sea net, and we were seeing it out here. And then my brother and me had this MFV a couple of years, 75, 50 MFV. That was in lanes at the belt during the war. For 10 dozen that, but belt so that they could go to fishing after the war was finished like. And we fished out here and Shetland, out in the north